The 11 seconds Muhammad Ali stood frozen in the corner while Leon Spinks, a 24-year-old with only 7 professional fights, landed punch after punch. Ali didn't move because he couldn't, and he couldn't because something inside him had already accepted what his pride wouldn't admit. He wasn't the greatest anymore. Angelo Dundee screamed from the corner, the crowd screamed from the seats. And Ali just stood there absorbing punishment like a man who decided that losing was easier than continuing to pretend he could still win. When the final bell rang and the judges declared Spinks the new heavyweight champion, Ali didn't look shocked or devastated. He looked relieved, as if the worst part wasn't losing the title, but finally being released from the burden of defending it. What happens when your body quits before your ego does? And what do those final 11 seconds reveal about a man who'd spent his entire life refusing to stay still? Leon Spinks shouldn't have been in a ring with Muhammad Ali. Everyone knew this. Spinks was 24 years old with exactly 7 professional fights, wins against opponents whose names nobody remembered, whose skills were mediocre at best. He'd won a gold medal at the 1976 Montreal Olympics, which was impressive in the amateur ranks, but meant little in professional boxing where the rules were different, the punches were harder, and the stakes were your livelihood rather than national pride. His technique was raw, unrefined. His defense was almost non-existent. He left openings that any competent fighter would exploit. But he had 2 things working in his favor: youth and fearlessness. At 24, his body recovered quickly, his energy seemed infinite, and he could throw punches for 15 rounds without the exhaustion that comes with age. And fearlessness, the kind that comes from not knowing enough to be afraid, from not having been hurt badly enough to develop caution. When Don King announced the fight, Ali versus Spinks for the heavyweight championship, the boxing world reacted with confusion that bordered on outrage. This wasn't a competitive matchup. This was a tune-up fight, a gimme, an easy payday for Ali before he faced real contenders. The betting odds reflected this certainty. Ali was an 8-1 favorite. Reporters asked Spinks if he understood what he was getting into, and Spinks, with the confidence of someone too young to know better, said, "I'm going to shock the world," which was exactly what Ali had said before beating Sonny Liston 14 years earlier. But Ali had been special fast, skilled, destined for greatness. Spinks was just a kid with a dream and 7 professional fights. How do you take seriously someone who shouldn't even be in the same ring as you? How do you prepare for a fight when preparation feels like an insult to your own legacy? And what happens when that dismissal, that absolute certainty that you can't lose, becomes the reason you do? Muhammad Ali didn't train for Leon Spinks. Not really. Not the way he'd trained for Liston or Frazier or Foreman. The grueling camps where he'd run miles in the morning, spar hard rounds in the afternoon, sacrifice everything to arrive in peak condition. Instead, Ali stayed in Los Angeles, living his life, enjoying his fame. Press conferences, television appearances, parties. The lifestyle that came with being the most famous athlete in the world. When Angelo Dundee urged him to get to camp, to start serious preparation, Ali laughed it off. Why train hard for a kid with 7 fights? I'm Muhammad Ali. I'll handle him. Angelo, who'd been with Ali since the beginning, recognized the danger in this attitude, but couldn't force a 36-year-old man to do what he didn't want to do. All he could do was warn, "Champ, you need to take this seriously. He's young, he's hungry, and hunger beats talent when talent doesn't work." But Ali wasn't listening. Or maybe he was listening, but couldn't accept what he was hearing. That he needed to work harder now than when he was younger. That age had stolen the advantages he'd once taken for granted. That coasting might work against mediocre opponents, but would fail against anyone with youth and determination. Ferdy Pacheco, Ali's doctor for most of his career, watched Ali during this period with growing alarm. Ali looked old. Not just chronologically, 36 isn't ancient, but physically. His movements were slower. His reflexes were diminishing. The hand speed that had made him untouchable was gone, replaced by something merely fast rather than supernaturally quick. And there were other signs, subtle but present a slight tremor in Ali's hands when they were at rest, a facial stiffness that suggested something neurological, a speech pattern that had slowed imperceptibly but noticeably to those who'd known him for years. Pacheco tried to express these concerns, but Ali shut him down. "I feel fine. Stop worrying." But feeling fine and being fine are different things, and at some level, maybe not consciously, maybe not in a way he could articulate. Ali knew this. Knew his body was betraying him. Knew that Manila had taken something he'd never get back. Knew that continuing to fight was accelerating damage that was probably already irreversible. But what was the alternative? Retirement. Admitting he was done. Accepting that Muhammad Ali, the greatest, had become just Muhammad Ali, a former fighter. That identity crisis was more terrifying than any opponent. So he kept fighting, kept pretending, kept telling himself that one more fight wouldn't hurt, that he could stop any time he wanted, that the tremors and the slowed speech and the diminished reflexes were temporary, recoverable, nothing to worry about. Can you lie to yourself so completely that you believe it? Or is there always a part of you that knows the truth and is just waiting for the right moment to force you to confront it? For Ali, that moment would come in the final 11 seconds of the 15th round against a kid named Spinks who wasn't supposed to win, but would, because Ali had forgotten the first rule of boxing. The fight doesn't care about your reputation, your legacy, or your name. The fight only cares about who shows up ready. And Ali wasn't ready. Hadn't been ready in a long time, was just very good at pretending he was, until he couldn't pretend anymore. February 15th, 1978, Las Vegas Hilton. And the atmosphere was strange. Not the electric anticipation of a real championship fight, but something more subdued, almost obligatory. People had bought tickets because it was Muhammad Ali, and watching Ali was always an event. But nobody really thought Spinks had a chance. This was going to be Ali putting on a show, maybe carrying the kid a few rounds to make it interesting, then finishing him when he got bored. In Ali's locker room before the fight, the mood was relaxed, almost casual. Ali joked with his cornerman, shadowboxed half-heartedly, seemed more interested in entertaining the people around him than in preparing for violence. Angelo worked quietly, wrapping Ali's hands with the precision of someone who'd done this thousands of times, but his face showed concern. He'd seen Ali like this before, overconfident, underprepared, assuming his name and reputation would be enough. Usually, Ali's natural talent compensated for lack of preparation. Usually, but watching Ali move during the warm-up, Angelo saw something that worried him. Ali looked heavy. Not overweight exactly, but not sharp either. His feet weren't dancing. They were shuffling. His punches weren't snapping. They were pushing. And when Angelo looked into Ali's eyes, trying to gauge his mental state, what he saw wasn't focus or determination or the controlled aggression that great fighters have before they enter the ring. What he saw was distance. Like Ali was already somewhere else, going through the motions because that's what was expected, but not really present. "You ready, champ?" Angelo asked. And Ali, smiling that famous smile, said, "I'm always ready." But the smile didn't reach his eyes, and Angelo, who'd been in enough corners to recognize when a fighter wasn't right, felt dread settle in his stomach. Across the building, in another locker room, Spinks was nervous but excited. His trainer, George Benton, had him moving, staying loose. Reviewing the game plan they'd drilled for weeks. Pressure Ali, don't let him rest, make it ugly, make it hard, turn it into a war of attrition that favored youth over experience. "He's old," Benton said. "He's slow. He thinks he can just show up and beat you because of his name. Prove him wrong." And Spinks, looking at himself in the mirror, young face, lean body, hands that hadn't yet accumulated the damage that comes with a long career, believed he could. Not because he was better than Ali. He wasn't. On skill, on technique, on ring IQ, Ali was superior in every way. But superiority on paper doesn't mean much when one fighter is 36 and tired and the other is 24 and hungry. When they walked to the ring, Ali first as the champion, to scattered applause that felt more respectful than enthusiastic, then Spinks, to cheers from the underdog supporters, and bemused laughter from those who couldn't believe this kid thought he had a chance. The contrast was stark. Ali looked like what he was, a man who'd been fighting professionally for 18 years, who'd been hit thousands of times, whose body carried the accumulated weight of every war he'd survived. Spinks looked like what he was, a kid who'd barely started, whose face was unmarked, whose body hadn't yet learned what real punishment felt like. They met in the center of the ring for the referee's instructions, and Ali tried his usual intimidation, leaning in, talking trash, trying to make Spinks doubt himself. But Spinks just stared back, not intimidated, not impressed, just ready. And in that moment, if Ali had been paying attention, he might have seen what Angelo had already recognized: this wasn't going to be easy. This kid didn't know enough to be scared. And sometimes, not knowing enough to be scared is the most dangerous thing an opponent can be. The bell rang, and for the first time in a long time, Muhammad Ali was in a fight he wasn't prepared for. Against an opponent he'd underestimated. In a body that was ready to quit, even if his pride wasn't. How long can reputation carry you when skill and physical ability have left? How many times can you survive on name alone before someone young and hungry decides your name doesn't matter as much as your current reality? And what do you do when you realize, in the middle of a fight, that you've made a terrible mistake? But it's too late to fix it, because the fight has already started and the only way out is through. These were questions Ali would have 15 rounds to answer, and the answers, when they came, would be brutal in their honesty. The first 3 rounds were uncomfortable for everyone watching who understood boxing. Ali moved, but slowly. He threw punches, but without the speed or precision that had defined his career. And Spinks, crude, unpolished Spinks, was landing. Not big shots, not knockout punches, but consistent, accumulating shots that shouldn't have been landing if Ali was the fighter he used to be. Angelo, working the corner after round 1, tried to adjust. "You gotta move your head more. You're letting him hit you clean." And Ali nodded, but the nod was automatic, not comprehension. In round 2, Spinks got bolder, pressing forward, throwing combinations that were technically sloppy but physically effective because youth and energy compensated for lack of refinement. Ali tried the rope-a-dope strategy that had worked against Foreman, leaning on the ropes, covering up, letting Spinks punch himself tired. But Foreman had been a one-dimensional puncher. Spinks was perpetual motion, throwing from every angle, never stopping, never getting tired because 24-year-old bodies don't get tired after 2 rounds. By round 3, the crowd's mood had shifted from amused confidence to confused concern. This wasn't supposed to be competitive. Ali was supposed to be dominating. Instead, he was defending, reacting, looking not like a champion but like a former champion trying to remember how he used to fight. The middle rounds, 4 through 8, belonged to Spinks, not because he was brilliant. He wasn't. His technique remained flawed, his defense remained porous, but he was relentless. Every time Ali tried to establish distance, Spinks closed it. Every time Ali tried to rest, Spinks attacked. Every time Ali looked for a moment to breathe, Spinks was there throwing punches, creating pressure, making Ali work in ways his 36-year-old body didn't want to work anymore. Angelo's instructions between rounds became increasingly desperate. "You're losing rounds." "Champ, you gotta do something different." But what was there to do differently? Ali tried moving more, but his legs were heavy. Tried punching more, but his arms were tired. Tried clinching to steal moments of rest, but the referee kept breaking them, and each separation meant starting over, expending energy Ali didn't have. In round 7, Ali landed his best combination of the fight, a jab, right hand, left hook sequence that snapped Spinks' head back and reminded everyone watching that the skill was still there, buried under age and fatigue, but still accessible. For a moment, it looked like Ali might be turning things around. But then Spinks just shook his head, smiled, and came forward again. And Ali, seeing that his best punches hadn't deterred this kid at all, felt something close to despair. Because if your best isn't enough, what's left? Can you dig deeper when deeper doesn't exist anymore? Can you will yourself to superiority when your body has stopped obeying your will? These were questions Ali had never had to answer before. He'd always been able to find something extra, always been able to reach down and discover reserves nobody knew he had. But that was when he was 25 or 30 or even 33. At 36, after Manila, after Holmes would later beat him worse, after years of accumulating damage, the reserves were gone. There was no extra. There was only what was left, and what was left wasn't enough. By round 9, Ali knew he was losing. Not just the fight, though he was definitely losing the fight, but losing the ability to do what he'd spent his entire life doing. His body was refusing to cooperate. His mind would send commands, move left, throw the combination, duck under the punch, and his body would respond slowly, incompletely, or not at all. The disconnect between intention and action is terrifying for anyone, but for an athlete whose entire identity is built on physical supremacy, it's existential. If your body no longer does what you tell it to, who are you? What are you? And when thousands of people are watching you discover this limitation in real time, how do you maintain the pretense that everything's fine? Ali tried. God, he tried. Kept fighting, kept moving, kept throwing punches even though each one cost more energy than the previous one. But trying isn't the same as succeeding, and everyone watching could see the gap widening between the Muhammad Ali of legend and the Muhammad Ali in the ring. A 36-year-old man who'd stayed too long, fought too much, sacrificed too much of his physical self for glory that was now slipping away punch by punch, round by round, second by second. Rounds 10 and 11 saw brief moments of Ali brilliance, flashes where muscle memory took over and he looked like himself, where experience and timing compensated for diminished speed. He'd land a perfect counter or slip a punch beautifully, and the crowd would roar, hoping for a miraculous comeback. But the moments were brief. Spinks would recover, press forward again, and Ali would go back to defending, covering up, trying to survive rather than win. By round 12, Angelo was pleading, "You need a knockout, champ. You need to hurt him. Points aren't going to win this." And Ali knew it was true. But knowing and doing are different things. He looked across the ring at Spinks, still fresh, still moving, still throwing punches with the energy of someone who hadn't been in a 15-round war, and wondered how. How is he still this strong? How am I this tired? When did I become the old man in this story? The questions had no good answers. Just the reality of biology: youth beats age. Always. Eventually. Tonight. How do you accept that reality when your entire identity has been built on transcending limitations, on being exceptional, on proving that normal rules don't apply to you? You don't accept it. You deny it. You keep fighting even when fighting is making it worse. You convince yourself that the next round will be different, that something will change, that the magic that saved you so many times before will appear one more time. But what if the magic is gone? What if you've used it all up? What if this fight, this opponent, this night is the moment when reality finally catches up to reputation and everyone, including you, has to confront who you actually are rather than who you used to be? For Muhammad Ali, that confrontation would come in round 15, specifically in the final 11 seconds. When his body would stop pretending it could continue, when his will would prove insufficient, when standing still and absorbing punishment would feel easier than moving, when surrender, not conscious, not verbal, but physical, would happen in front of 20,000 people and millions watching on television, when the greatest fighter of his generation would stand frozen in a corner and let a 24-year-old kid with 7 professional fights take away his championship. Not because Spinks was better, but because Ali wasn't Ali anymore, and everyone was about to see it, including Ali himself. And that knowledge, that public, undeniable, permanent knowledge, would change everything. Not just the fight, everything, who he was, what he meant, how he saw himself, all of it, in 11 seconds. How long does it take to destroy a legend? Longer than you think, and faster than you'd believe. And sometimes it happens so gradually that you don't notice until suddenly there's a moment, frozen, eternal, inescapable, where the destruction becomes visible to everyone. This was that moment, coming in 11 seconds, after 14 rounds and 44 minutes of denying it. The truth was coming. And Ali, standing in his corner between rounds 14 and 15, exhausted beyond description, knowing he was behind on points, knowing he needed something miraculous, also knew something else. The truth had already arrived. His body had already quit. It just hadn't told his pride yet. And the disconnect between those two realities, the pride that insisted he could still win and the body that had already stopped trying, would define the final moments of the fight, would define how people remembered this night, would define the beginning of the end. 11 seconds. That's all it would take. For everyone to see what Ali had been hiding from himself, that he was done, had been done for a while, was just very, very good at pretending he wasn't, until he couldn't pretend anymore, until his body made the decision his pride wouldn't make, until standing still became easier than moving, until surrender, quiet, physical, complete, became the only option left. The bell rang for round 15, the final round, 3 minutes to save his championship, 3 minutes to prove he was still the greatest, 3 minutes to show that age and exhaustion and accumulation of damage hadn't stolen what made him special. And for 2 minutes and 49 seconds, he tried. God knows he tried. Threw punches, moved when he could, fought back when Spinks attacked. But trying isn't enough when your body has stopped cooperating. And with 11 seconds left, just 11 seconds before the final bell, Ali's body made the decision his pride had been refusing to make. It stopped. Completely. Definitively. Publicly. And what happened in those 11 seconds would reveal more about Muhammad Ali than any victory ever could. Because anyone can look great when they're winning. The truth comes when you're losing. When you're tired. When you've got nothing left. That's when you discover who you really are. And Muhammad Ali was about to discover, in front of the world, that he was human. Mortal. Finished. Everything he'd spent his life denying, all of it. Visible. Undeniable. In 11 seconds that would last forever. Round 15, final minute. Spinks could feel victory coming. Could sense Ali was fading. So he pressed, not carefully, not tactically, but with the aggressive certainty of youth recognizing opportunity. He pushed Ali backward, step by step, until Ali's back hit the ropes in the corner. Not the worst position for Ali. He'd spent his career on the ropes, had beaten Foreman from the ropes, had survived Frazier from the ropes. But those were different ropes, different fights, different versions of Ali who could still counter, still move, still do something. This Ali, 36 years old, exhausted, behind on points, knowing he was losing but unable to do anything about it. This Ali just stood there. Spinks started throwing, jab, jab, right hand, left hook, combinations that weren't pretty but were effective. And Ali didn't move, didn't slip, didn't counter, didn't clinch. Just stood there, gloves up, absorbing shots, his eyes open but looking at something beyond the ring. From Ali's corner, Angelo Dundee saw what was happening and screamed, "OV!" Bandini was screaming too, DNCE, "Shut AMP, Dancy!" But Ali didn't move. Couldn't move, or wouldn't move. The distinction doesn't matter when the result is the same: a former champion standing motionless while a 24-year-old kid takes away his legacy punch by punch. 11 seconds. That's how long it lasted. 11 seconds of Ali standing frozen while Spinks threw 8 punches. 8 punches that landed clean because Ali made no attempt to defend them. The crowd noise changed from cheering to something more primal, screaming that was part encouragement and part horror. Move, Ali, please move. Do something. Anything. But Ali didn't. His body had quit. Had decided, whether consciously or not, that absorbing punishment while standing still was easier than trying to move when movement had become impossible. Had surrendered in the only way a fighter's body can surrender while pride keeps them from verbally quitting, by simply stopping. By refusing to participate anymore. By standing still and taking it until someone, the referee, the corner, the final bell, made it end. 8 seconds. 7. 6. The punches kept coming. Ali's head snapped back with each impact. His body swayed but didn't fall. Spinks kept throwing, sensing he was landing shots that might not be hard enough to knock Ali down, but were scoring points, impressing judges, definitively winning the round and therefore the fight. 5 seconds. 4. Angelo looked at the corner, at the white towel that corner men use to signal surrender, and reached for it. Was about to throw it, was a second away from stopping the fight and saving Ali from himself. But something stopped him. Not courage. Not belief that Ali could still win. But the knowledge that Ali would never forgive him if he threw that towel. That ending Ali's championship reign by corner stoppage would be worse, in Ali's mind, than losing a decision. So Angelo held the towel. Let those final seconds play out. Let Ali stand there motionless while Spinks landed 3 more punches. 3, 2, 1. The final bell rang. The fight was over. Spinks raised his arms, knowing he'd won. Not sure exactly how, but certain that he had. His corner rushed in, celebrating, screaming. The crowd was on its feet, half celebrating the upset, half too shocked to celebrate, processing what they'd just witnessed. And in Ali's corner, Angelo climbed through the ropes to where Ali stood, still in the same position, still leaning on the ropes, looking more relieved than disappointed. Angelo put his arm around Ali's shoulders. "You okay, champ?" And Ali, barely audible over the crowd noise, said something that broke Angelo's heart. "Yeah, it's over. Not, we'll get him in the rematch. Not, I'll train harder next time. Just, it's over." As if the fight wasn't the only thing that had ended. As if something larger had concluded in those 11 seconds of standing still. As if Ali had finally admitted to himself what his body had been telling him for years: he was done. The announcement made it official, and new heavyweight champion of the world, by split decision, Leon Spinks. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Excitement for the underdog, disbelief at the upset. Mourning for what this meant about Ali. Because this wasn't just a loss. This was the visual confirmation that time wins every argument eventually. That legends age. That the unbeatable eventually get beaten. That Muhammad Ali, who'd survived Liston and Frazier and Foreman, who'd transcended boxing to become a global icon, who'd seemed immune to the normal rules of aging and decline, was human after all. And humanity, for a man who'd built his identity on being superhuman, was the cruelest defeat of all. In the locker room afterward, Ali sat on a bench while Ferdy Pacheco examined him. No serious damage, no cuts requiring stitches. Just exhaustion. Deep, cellular exhaustion that came from asking a body to do something it wasn't capable of doing anymore. Reporters crowded around, asking the inevitable questions: what happened? Will you retire? How does it feel to lose? And Ali, mustering the charm that had made him famous, tried to give them something. He fought a good fight. Fair and square. I'll get my title back. But the words were hollow. Everyone in the room could hear it, could see it in Ali's eyes. This wasn't confidence. This was obligation. The performance that fame required. The mask that Muhammad Ali wore when the human underneath wanted to scream or cry or just sit in silence. When the reporters finally left, when it was just Ali in his corner and the people who loved him, Angelo asked the question he'd been dreading. Why didn't you move at the end? In those last seconds, why didn't you move? And Ali, staring at his hands that had been the fastest in heavyweight history, hands that were now slightly trembling, said quietly, "I don't know. I wanted to. I thought about moving. But my body, it just wouldn't. It was like there was a disconnect. My mind said move and my body said no. And my body won. That answer, honest, raw, terrifying, hung in the air. Because what it meant was worse than just losing a fight. It meant Ali had lost control of the thing that had defined him, his body, his instrument, the tool that had made Muhammad Ali possible. If his body wouldn't obey anymore, if the disconnect had grown too large to bridge, then what was left? Who was he without the physical ability to be who he'd always been? These were existential questions Ali wasn't ready to answer. So instead, he did what fighters do when confronted with endings they can't accept. He announced he'd fight again, get the title back, prove this was a fluke, show the world the real Muhammad Ali. Except the real Muhammad Ali had just been revealed in those 11 seconds of standing motionless in a corner. The real Muhammad Ali was 30, 6 years old with diminishing reflexes and a body that had started betraying him. The real Muhammad Ali should have retired that night. Should have walked away with something left. Should have chosen preservation over one more fight. But champions don't think like that. Champions think one more time. One more fight. One more chance to prove I'm still me. And so Ali would fight Spinks again 7 months later, in a rematch where he'd win back the title through sheer will and Spinks' lack of preparation. Would become the first 3-time heavyweight champion. Would have his glory moment. But that glory would be brief, hollow, built on fighting someone who'd partied away his advantage rather than fighting someone great. And then Ali would fight twice more, losing badly to Larry Holmes, losing worse to Trevor Berbick, before finally retiring for good. And by then, the damage would be done. The Parkinson's would be undeniable. The tremors would be constant. The slow speech, the rigid face, the shuffling walk. All the symptoms of a brain that had absorbed too much trauma. All of it traceable back to fights like this. Fights he should have walked away from. Moments like those 11 seconds where his body begged him to stop and he refused to listen. 7 years after the Spinks fight, Ali would sit for an interview, his hands shaking, his speech slow, and a reporter would ask if he regretted continuing to fight after his skills had diminished. And Ali, with the painful honesty that came when his body could no longer disguise truth behind performance, said, "Those last few fights. Spinks, Holmes, Berbick. I shouldn't have taken them. My body was telling me no. But I didn't listen. I thought I was special. Thought the rules didn't apply to me. But they do. They apply to everyone. Even me." The reporter asked about those 11 seconds against Spinks. The moment he stood frozen in the corner. Did he remember it? And Ali nodded slowly. I remember thinking move. Just move. Get out of there. But I couldn't. It was like my body had made a decision without asking me. And in that moment, I knew I was done. Should have been done. But I didn't want to accept it. Didn't want to be the guy who quits. So I kept going. Kept fighting. And it cost me. Cost me my health. Cost me parts of myself I'll never get back. Was it worth it? To be 3-time champion. To have one more moment of glory. I don't know. Ask me on my good days and I'll say yes. Ask me on my bad days, when my hands won't stop shaking, when I can barely speak, when I can't do simple things that everyone else takes for granted. Ask me then, and I'll say no. I'll say those 11 seconds were my body trying to save me, and I ignored it. And now I'm paying the price. And I'll pay it for the rest of my life. That interview would be difficult to watch. Not because Ali complained. He didn't. But because the truth was so stark. Here was a man who'd been the most physically gifted athlete of his generation, reduced to trembling and slow speech and visible struggle. Here was Muhammad Ali, the greatest, paying the price for refusing to acknowledge when greatness had left him. And it all traced back to moments like those 11 seconds. Moments where surrender would have been mercy but pride made it impossible. Moments where the body begged to stop but the ego insisted on continuing. Moments where being Muhammad Ali, the legend, the icon, the man who never quit, cost him the ability to be Muhammad Ali, the person, healthy and whole and present. Can you separate the legend from the man? Can you celebrate the greatness while acknowledging the cost? Can you watch those 11 seconds, Ali frozen, absorbing punishment, his body having quit while his pride kept him standing, and call it anything other than tragedy? Because that's what it was. Not a fight. Not sport, not competition, tragedy. A man destroying himself in public because his identity wouldn't allow him to stop. Because being the greatest meant fighting until there was nothing left to fight with. Because quitting, even when quitting was survival, wasn't something Muhammad Ali knew how to do. So he stood there, for 11 seconds that revealed everything, about who he was, about what boxing cost, about the price of refusing to accept human limitations. 11 seconds. That's all it took to show the world that Muhammad Ali was mortal. That legends end, that bodies betray, that the disconnect between who you were and who you are can grow so large that one day, in front of thousands of people, your body simply stops participating in the fiction your mind has been telling. 11 seconds, and nothing was the same after. Not for Ali. Not for the people who watched. Not for anyone who understood what those seconds represented the moment a god became a man. The moment greatness revealed its cost. The moment Muhammad Ali stopped being invincible and started being a cautionary tale about staying too long. How do you watch those 11 seconds and not feel something break? How do you see him standing there, motionless, taking punches he can't defend against, and not wonder, why didn't someone stop this sooner? Why did we let it get to this? Why did we celebrate one more fight when we could see he was done? But we didn't stop it. We bought tickets. We watched. We cheered. We wanted one more moment of Ali magic. And when the magic was gone, when all that remained was an aging fighter standing frozen in a corner while his body quit on him, we called it an upset. Called it sports. Called it anything except what it was, the beginning of the end. And the end, when it fully came, Parkinson's, trembling hands, slowed speech. A life lived in the shadow of who he'd been. Would be hard to watch. But not as hard as those 11 seconds. Because those 11 seconds were the moment Ali knew, the moment his body told him a truth his pride had been denying. The moment the performance ended and reality broke through. And knowing, really knowing, undeniably knowing, that you're not who you used to be, that you can't do what you once did, that the thing that made you special is gone. That's harder than any punch, lasts longer than any fight, and hurts worse than any defeat. Muhammad Ali stood motionless for 11 seconds. And in those 11 seconds, he lost more than a fight. He lost the illusion, the one that said he could fight forever, that greatness was permanent, that Muhammad Ali would always be the greatest. 11 seconds. And the illusion shattered. And what remained was just a man, tired, hurt, human, standing in a corner absorbing punches he couldn't defend against, his body having surrendered while his pride kept him upright. That was the truth. That was Muhammad Ali, not the legend. The man, and the man had been done for a while. Just took 11 seconds for everyone, including him, to finally see it.